class, this is a walkthrough of problem number 4 from the chapter 5 and 17 sample problems, which is going through some other examples of distribution of joint costing. So here we've got Royalston, which is a food processing company. They process 150,000 pounds of peanuts in the peanuts department at a cost of $180,000 to yield 12,000 pounds of product A, 65,000 pounds of product B, and 16,000 pounds of product C, which we can see over here, right? So they've got $180,000 it shows here of joint costs up to the split off point, and then additional processing costs for the salted peanuts and the peanut butter down here. So the first thing they're asking us to do is to compute unit costs per pound for each of these, and we're going to treat C as a byproduct. So using the net realizable value method, so the first thing we're going to do is show they're asking us to look at product C first, which is the peanut butter. So to calculate the joint costs that are allocated, we're going to take the joint costs minus the net realizable value to get the allocated costs that are allocated here. So, okay, so we have joint costs of 180,000, and we need to now calculate the net realizable value here for product C in order to calculate this. So basically, because we're treating this as a byproduct, that's a key point right here, right? Treating it as a byproduct, we're going to allocate joint costs that basically zero out the value. So these two are products where we anticipate to make money on them, and these are ones where we just hope to basically break even because it's a byproduct. All right. So in terms of the net realizable value, we need to calculate our revenue and then any other costs that we have associated with that. It looks like we have additional processing of $12,000, and it looks like we've got, let's see here, sale price of $6 per pound. So let's go ahead and calculate that. $6 times 16,000 pounds. All right. I'm going to put this as a negative here because then I can just sum these. And then let's see here. If we've got product C is considered a byproduct processed further at a cost of $12,000, sold for $6 per pound. Do we have, let's see here, any other costs here? One second here. So I already got that. Okay, so we need to make gross margin of 10% of revenues in addition to this. Okay, so we want to make sure that whatever our costs are, we're adding in a gross margin here of 9,600. Which is 10%. And then 20% of revenues for marketing costs. Okay. I'm actually going to put that as a negative there because we want to make sure we make that much money, right? So marketing costs end up being 20%, 0.2 times 96,000. So 19,200. All right, so the reason I'm adding in that gross margin, by the way, if we want to make that much money, if we're going to allocate joint costs equal to this, there's a couple ways you could do this, right? Like you could do this as the 96,000 in revenue minus 12,000 minus 19,200, getting a net of $64,800. But we don't want to allocate all of that if we're just breaking even, since we're going to want a 10% gross margin. We're then going to say, all right, we can't allocate 64,800. So we're going to subtract the $9,600 we want to make sure we end up with. That gets us to the same 55,200 here. Okay. So net realizable value 55,200 gets us to joint costs allocated here of $124,800. Okay. Okay, so now they want us to identify the net realizable value for products A and B also, and then identify the joint costs that are allocated to each of those. Now, the total that we're going to allocate to the others is going to be the 124,800 here, okay? So we need to come up with net realizable value. This was product C. So we're going to do something here. Product A, revenue. And here we don't need to worry about the gross margin part. We're just going to look at any additional processing. And it looks like marketing was only on product C, I think. So let's see here. So for revenues for product A, we've got 12,000 pounds times $12 per pound, and then additional processing minus 27,000 gets us net realizable value of 117,000. And then we're going to do the same thing for product B here. Revenue is going to be 65,000 pounds times $3 a pound for 195,000. And there's no additional processing. So that's just going to end up being our net realizable value there. All right, so in total then, the sum of those two is 312,000 down here. So then I'm just going to do the weighting, 117,000 divided by the 312,000. Okay, and then we're rounding to 4 decimal places. So 0.375, 0.625. I highlight those, they add up to 1, so I'm good. Then in terms of joint costs, then taking the 124,800 is got to be our total. Taking that and multiplying it times each of those weights. So $78,000, that one, and 46,800 there. Okay, So now they want us to determine the unit costs, right? So we're going to take the total costs for each of these. And then we're going to divide those by the number of units. All right. So our total costs are going to include joint costs plus additional processing, right? So let's look here. Product A, B, C. We're going to have the joint costs, and we're going to have any additional costs. And so for product A, that's going to consist of the joint costs of 46,800 plus the additional costs of 27,000. So $73,800 for that one. And then here we're going to have joint costs of 78,000. And down here for product C, we had the joint costs that we allocated were, hold on a second here, the difference there, right? So hold on. $55,200. Oh yeah, right up there. And then the peanuts, let's see, so the raw peanuts had no additional costs, and the peanut butter had the 12,000 plus the marketing of 19,200, right? So if we drag this down, 78,000. Okay, so 73,800, 78,000, and hold on a second here. Oh, actually, I think I'm just doing sorry, I don't need the marketing on there for right now. That's going to be separate. We're just looking at inventoriable costs here. So 67,200. All right, now for number of units, let's see. So we had 12,065 and 16. Okay. So I'm just going to take my total costs divided by my total units. There we go. $6.15, $1.20, and $4.20. All right, now for the next part, let's see, compute unit costs per pound for products A, B, and C, treating all three as joint products and allocating joint costs by the net realizable value method. Okay, so we have already calculated the net realizable value up above for these two, so we can actually copy those dollar amounts down. And in terms of the net realizable value here, we're going to take our, let's see here. The net realizable value, one second here. So we're just remembering that for net realizable value, we want to take our revenues minus separable costs. Okay, right? So for product C, we had revenues that we came up with of 96,000 above. Now, we're ignoring joint costs here. We're just gonna subtract out here. We've got 12,000 in additional processing, right? Yeah, 12,000 in additional processing. And then we calculated also, oops, that we had those additional marketing costs. So separable costs are 31,200. So that gets us to a net realizable value of 64,800 for that one. Okay, so in total then, now we're just gonna do our weights the same way we would have before. So total here is gonna be the 376,800. And then in terms of weights here, so we've got 117,000 divided by 376,800. So 0.3101, all right, or 3105. We're going to 4 digits. $195,000 times that total. And the 64,800 divided by the total. And if we highlight all three, they add up to 1. All right, so we're in good shape here. Okay, so 0.5175 and 0.1719, actually 1720. Okay, so let's just look at that. All right, and it does with it rounded equal to 1. Okay, so then we're just going to take those and multiply them times our total joint costs, which were the 180,000. Okay, so equals 0.3105 times 180. Just taking each of those times 180,000, right? Total ends up being 180,000. All right, we're in good shape. So under this method, when we treated the peanuts like a product, instead of allocating 55,200, we actually allocated less to the peanuts this way because we just were wiping it down to only a 10% margin with our method that we did up here. All right, last part here, finally. We are going to, let's see, compute the unit costs again. So just taking our total costs divided by our number of units. And so for total costs now, let's copy this down here. And I'm just gonna change these joint costs that we allocated to the new amounts. And make sure I have formulas in these and not hard-coded numbers. Those are fine because it's units. And that should get me there. All right, so copying that in. Oops, total costs. 82,890 divided by 12,000 gets us to a unit cost of 691. 93,150 divided by 65,000 gets us to 1.43. And because we're rounding to the nearest penny, 42,960 divided by 269 gets us, gets us to 269 dividing by 16,000. That's what happens when I'm reading and typing at the same time. Okay, so the unit cost went up for product A and for product B because more of the joint costs were allocated to them when we weren't zeroing out essentially our profit on product C. So that's sort of the takeaway here. Let me know if you have any questions.